We're told that obviously the mobile revolution is happening in Africa, more and more people starting to use mobile phones. I think continentally penetration is 50%, but when you look at the figures for the internet, it's 8 to 10%. So we're using our cell phones, but we're not using them to, you know, get data services and do all these very sophisticated things with them.
I agree. And I think that part of the reason for this is that the cost of data is still prohibitive in many of these markets. I mean, this will go down in time. We've seen the new cable along the East African coast going live, and we're hoping that this will translate to, you know, lower cost for the users eventually. But I think another aspect of this is the fact that smartphone penetration is still quite low in these markets. It's growing. BlackBerry is definitely on a growth path, but it will take a while to get there, because if the number of things that you can do on your phone is limited, you will not be using as much data as elsewhere in the world.
So is cost still prohibitive? Because when I have two phones actually, and I have one of those very simple pay-as-you-go account things on a Nokia, and then I have a BlackBerry. Yes. And it's cheaper to buy the simpler phone.
Exactly. It's cheaper to buy the simpler phone. And we're seeing players like Google launching their $100 smartphone in markets in East Africa. So, I mean, things are changing, and we'll probably see patterns becoming more in line with where the world is going in a couple of years, but it's going to take a while to translate to what people are actually doing.
We're told that in terms of usage of data services, it's still very low in Africa, as you're saying, but there's an incredible phenomenon of the growth of mobile reporting, mobile journalism, and I suppose that's just kind of the limitation of journalists being able to access a lot of these markets, broadcast facilities, etc. But what else are people using their phones for? We're using them for news and media research.
Exactly.
And then what?
And you know what's interesting? We as in the journalism marketing space, we use our mobile phones a whole lot for information. What people are doing on their phones in Africa is very interesting. People are going on their phones because they want to be entertained. They want to access music, digital data. And what's interesting is in the study, we compared not just the African markets, but African markets and global markets in particular. And patterns in the States are quite different. People there want functional features on their phones. They want location services. They want to be able to navigate their phone easier. You know, and you would think that in having less money in Africa, relatively, that people would want just basic functional things. But the mobile phone is actually a way for people and companies to improve people's lives, keep people entertained. People access everything on the one device. That's my camera. That's my music, radio, you know, the internet. I get everything on this device. I can't afford an iPod and a laptop and an iPhone. You know what I mean?
Let's talk about trends of behavior across regions, starting off with South Africa, where we're at right now. Apparently, although cell phone penetration is almost saturated, data services, as I said, not so. People, particularly in rural areas, still prefer to buy the physical newspaper, listen to the radio as a device, not to use the mechanism on the phone. So in terms of digital media and its accessibility, why are we doing this here?
I think what we have to recognize is that in Africa, people connect socially a whole lot more than in the rest of the world, shall we say. I mean, people need to speak to their friends. That's the biggest source of information before buying a mobile phone. People will speak to their friends, their family, their colleagues. They're not going to be like someone in the States who'll first go on a manufacturer's website and look at the specs of the phone. I need to have heard about it from somewhere. I need to have interacted with it, you know, because my friend has it. So we find that social interactions play a really big role. And there are companies that are tapping into this. They're recognizing this, from your small brands to your bigger brands, in that if you provide a solution through the mobile phone, then you may need to provide a face for the brand.
Okay, so simplify this for me. If social interactions are very important for us because we build trust on the hearsay of people we care about, then that should create a platform for the likes of social media, the Facebooks, the Twitters, etc., and growing these brands through those mechanisms.
I agree.
Platforms, rather.
I agree. If nothing else, then you need to at least have a presence on social media. You need to be active. I mean, people in Africa, in this way, they're the same as the rest of the world. They don't want you as a brand to intrude on their time on social media. You know, you need to engage with them, but, you know, make it more pull than push, if you know what I mean. And I think one of the things that came out strongly is that in a market like Nigeria, it differed quite a bit from South Africa and Kenya, because people are doing a lot of product searches while they're on social media. They're actually looking for things on the social media network. And this was quite interesting. The numbers were actually quite high.
Behavior in East Africa. We often hear about all sorts of interesting things with money transfer services, and it seems to be the one place in Africa where the banks and the cell phone operators are working in tandem. Is that primarily what people use their devices for?
I think, well, obviously, primarily people use their devices for voice calls. That's still big. SMS is still big as smartphone penetration grows. But M-Pesa is absolutely enormous, especially in a market like Kenya. And you would find that M-Pesa was initially launched. I think they were very clever in the way they launched the brand. It was not targeted at a certain demographic, at poor people, shall we say. The communication was all around if you're in an urban area and your family is still in a rural area. And this, I mean, the demographics splits are quite different from South Africa. But anyway, people need to connect. You still need to take care of your family back home. And the communication, the launch communication showed this. And I think what's happened is M-Pesa started as a brand that connects people, but it didn't discriminate anyone. Yeah. And so you have your lower end people who weren't banked using this as their primary place to perform their financial transactions, because what you need to do is send money. You may not have much money to save, but we find that people are saving the little that they have, the few shillings that they have left over. They're keeping them afloat on M-Pesa, so it's become a savings device as well. And I think because it's become the primary medium that the majority of the country accesses financial services, then the banks have also come on board. We've seen some banks launching savings accounts that are linked to M-Pesa. And with some banks, it's now possible to make transactions between your bank account and your M-Pesa account. So you're almost missing out on a trick here if you're not in
innovation for operators and service providers, given that there's still huge growth potential. At 10% internet penetration, there is a world of opportunity out there in sub-Saharan Africa. What should they really be tapping into by way of what you're identifying in terms of behavioral trends, issues of market access, and issues of trust, social interaction?
Exactly. And I think that's what I alluded to earlier, creating a face for your brand. If you want people to access your services, you can do it on a mobile phone platform. And what this avails to most brands is basically a low-cost distribution channel. But you'll find that your low-income people may not have the education needed to actually go on their phones and, I don't know, perform sophisticated, say, banking transactions or buying an insurance policy. But if you give them to someone in their community, and there are companies doing this in South Africa, give a phone to a respected person in the community that they can use as their virtual office, and that's the face for your brand. And so you have a low-cost distribution platform, and this person interacts with people in the community, brings them on board, they trust him. You know, it's not impersonal anymore. So I think in Africa, it definitely helps to have that sort of human interface.
Do you send your research out to the operators just by way of them looking at what the opportunities and the options are, particularly when we're talking about costs? Because already now, people are moving beyond the cell phone now into the iPad. I've got a 9-year-old nephew who has an iPad. I don't even have an iPad. Yeah. But it costs a lot of money. I mean, on average, $200–300 US. So if we're wanting an information technology oriented economy, all these facilities have to be accessible. I know that the operators are nervous when we talk about subsidizing handsets and various devices, but that's one option.
That's definitely one option. I think, well, tablet ownership is still definitely in its infancy in South Africa. I think the number is something like 1% from our research, but I think this will grow as with anything else going forward. But the mobile phone is a platform that's available now. You know, it's a ready channel for brands. And especially from the marketing perspective, the case studies we've seen that work most effectively show that the mobile phone may not be ready as a channel by itself to be your whole communication strategy, but if you use it cleverly with TV, with radio, and that's why you need to find out what people are doing, because you need to know when are people on their mobile phones? When are they going on the internet? What times are they most heavily using social media? And you know, you find interesting things like our data showed that over dinner, during dinner time, that's when most Kenyans are on social media.
That's bad manners. They
I
should
know.
be having dinner together as a family. Thanks so much for your time.